Uh, Most of you have been here long enough. You remember, even though the last few years we've been able to come to agreement in May, historically that happened more in the fall. Usually, trying to figure out exactly what the legislature they wouldn't settle, hold out for as much money as we could possibly find, and then we continue our conversation. It's sort of the same thing again this year. We're with the declining enrollment and lack of funding. Really, it's imperative to figure out what did our weightings do on 9/20. That's kind of a critical date from a financial standpoint. Earlier than that, a critical date is June 30. Where did we end the year? Because quite honestly, got a little over our skis last year on the agreement, and then suddenly projections and everything don't pan out. From a financial perspective, I think it'd be a lot better if we could see exactly where are we, what can we do. So I know there's a lot of policy conversations, but just I've never really chimed in about my thoughts are fall would be much better to have the financial conversation because we'll know exactly where we're at.
So how would that impact the timeline of some of the things that we're talking about? Like I could see some of the conversations we've already had. If we're flipping a switch in October or November, that could be a lot harder.
Yeah, that's a good question. Some of the things would be difficult to implement kind of mid-year or early in the year. Kind of a thing that we have in place and have done in the past on some items is an MOU. We could work on an MOU with some of those things that we've come to agreement on, for example, calendar and some of those things that really need to be probably in place and not able to wait till that point. We could do an MOU and kind of decide what items we can come to agreement on to put on the MOU and then go through that same process of the ratification. Has to be ratified just as a normal agreement would have to be.
And I think if I remember correctly, the last time that we did MOU or memorandum of understanding was COVID.
I believe we did one about 3 years ago when we didn't settle till November because we had to ratify calendars.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so about 3 years ago. So.
Okay. I think just in efficiency, trying to get through all of our items on our agenda. Obviously, we want to be able to talk about MOU and the possibility of ending the school year through an MOU, and we could do that after we meet today, rather than trying to do a caucus and give you a little more information on that once we've done that. But I think we're good to go ahead and move forward on the agenda, and that way we're not sitting around to caucus and then come back together since there's other things going on tonight. Okay. All right. So we are at everybody's favorite time of year. We have counters to counters. So we're going to start off with blackout days. We started with proposal for elimination. District counter yesterday, last week, I'll get it. With a reduction of those, and we appreciate the acknowledgement in that counter of just how nearly a third of our contract for the 187-day contracts, nearly a third of those were blackouts. So we appreciate the acknowledgement that reducing that would be something that you all would consider. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Julia.
So I'm gonna do my best. And because we have our slides, I'll be able to add the notes. So I'm not going to torture everyone with typing and speaking at the same time. But the current calendar that we have up here, the numbers, is comparing to the proposal for next year. So this is the current for next year, right? No, the current this year.
This would be, yeah,
Current, the current, yes, counter. Yes. So the current one with the 55 blackout days to the 187, that's where the 29.4% comes from. And then the counter that was proposed last time reduces the blackout days to 38, which is overall a 20% of the contract days. So it's a reduction, but not as far as we would like to see it be. As Angie said, our original proposal was a complete elimination of them. So when looking at everything and kind of digesting all the information, the main reductions came in August and May, and that's where most of the blackout days were anyway, so that makes sense. But then the number of days actually increases in October and February. So it is a little bit counterintuitive to what we're going for. And then September to December, January, March, and April stayed the same. So looking at everything, it is a reduction. It's a shift in some ways, especially in October and February. So just kind of looking at where maybe we could cut some things down that wouldn't impact the overall goals of conferences and professional learning. So with that, we have here our counter would be to reduce it a little bit further to the 29 days versus 38. So we've, like I said, reduced it by 11 more, and that gets us to it being about 15% of the overall contract days. So reducing it that much further. So looking at that, kind of where those days would come from is probably the biggest question. It's easiest if you compare it to the slide that we had from last week, where it has it all broken down by month, but just kind of running through it in as best as possible is that the contract and work days were the ones that we looked at them to look at. And so it's not the conference days or the professional learning days, especially those before the school year. So August, we would keep that the same. It would be in terms of the first 3 days for those new to district people, and then the first 2 student contact days as well. September, it would be the same. We wouldn't change anything in September. October, agreeing to the no blackout days on the professional learning and having the conference week be that Monday through Thursday, since Friday is a no school day, just to help with the clarity on that as well. November, agreeing, yes, no blackout days on the professional learning, and then to reduce that to 1 day before the breaks. Again, finding the days that doesn't impact the professional learning there. December, same, agreeing to no blackout days on the professional learning. Again, reducing it down to that 1 day before and after the breaks, which also is the same then for January, because winter break spans over December and January. For February, very similar to October, having those no blackout days on the professional learning, and then the 1 day before and after the holiday, because we have that longer weekend in February as well. And then same with the Monday through Thursday for the conference week. And then March, to reduce that down to just the 1 day before and after break. April, no changes there. And then May, the last day, agreeing to the last day of that 187 contract day, but to reduce it to the last 7 student contact days.
So the substantial changes are removing the Friday of the conference week,
Yes.
on long breaks going to 1 day instead of 2 days as a buffer there, and then a small decrease at the end of May from the district's last offer.
Yeah. That's a lot of words I said, but yes, that is what we looked at.
Total number.
Days before after Thanksgiving and spring break,
Mhm.
that would yield 2 days each. So
Yeah.
4, 6.
Six.
And then 2 Fridays.
Yep.
Mhm.
8.
I think there's
Eight.
3 cut off in May.
In May.
Is it, our language says,
The last
Yeah.
7.
And I believe pull up Michelle's documents, which is so nicely nestled. Yeah, the mapping on this was
Yes,
a challenge.
it was. Yes, and looking at, because where we added a couple days and then, yeah, rearranging them around.
August is imagine what
Mhm.
September is the same as well. Right, because you catch
Yeah,
one day before
September.
and after.
Mhm. Yep.
And then in October, it's taking off the Friday of conferences.
Yep.
So there's one.
2.
Then in November, it would be taking off 2 more because the 19th would no longer be, that's the 19th of November, and then the 1st of December,
Mhm.
okay?
And then,
And then in December, it would be another -1 from the 17th would be taken off, correct? And then in January, the 5th would come off.
yes.
And then in February, the 12th would come off.
Yes, that Friday.
and, oh, yeah,
Yeah. It's the only-
yes, yes.
And then in March, the 11th would come off. And the 23rd would come off.
Mhm.
And in April would stay,
Yeah.
right?
April stays the same. Yep.
And in May, yours is,
You had 8 days and we
Seven.
proposed 7.
Seven.
I guess we're just doing 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what that.
that was an 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an 8, so that's what.
math.
Yeah, the May day was.
Yeah.
I was doing literal back of the.
Yeah. So +1 -1, yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Last 8, and then the non 10 days.
Figure out the first bullet will have it, the purposes of this policy of the contract. Or work days are impacted.
So that is in the original policy, but it was like stuck in the middle of the list.
Okay,
So it just moved up.
gotcha. Trying to think.
I'm not sure
What
it's
days?
necessary, but
Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you for pointing that, because I was thinking, why,
I'm trying to think of,
what days would you? I mean, I'm thinking of,
I was like,
totally off the top of my head. Summer conference, or but that's not a contract.
Right.
Yeah.
I realize everyone's on different.
I can't come up with those.
Who says for,
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe at one point, perhaps that language might have had to do with the way we used to do conferences. I don't know. We have a current practice that works with how we do conferences.
It's probably right, it's probably left over from. somewhere
But
along
that's
the way.
Just
Okay,
guessing,
yeah,
because I am elderly, but not that elderly.
thank you, because I was trying to rack my brain.
Yeah.
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 Any other questions on that? All right. We can always loop back if something pops up later, but we've got so much, we'll kind of keep rolling. Excuse me, on the professional day language, we had 2 topics, so I'll move it over to Megan.
So under the elementary plan time, we just have a little bit of clarification within the language. And then after that, with the sped paperwork days, we wanted to bring these 2 quotes just to the forefront. Will we prep for a sub just for it to be pulled? Will I have a say in when the day happens? So that kind of can help us as we move forward. So with the elementary plan time language, at the top left corner, you'll see our original proposal. And then the bottom right, you'll see the district's counter proposal. We just wanted to clarify the highlighted sentence that was a part of our original proposal, wasn't suggested language, but it was rather just a note that the language from the professional learning policy also shows up in the elementary scheduling document, which is in the agreement on page 76. So we were agreeing that we would not use those page numbers. We were just putting that sentence in there to help that, but that would not be the language we would add. We also want to note that we discussed taking off the variance clause in the beginning of the language. And at the table, we had discussed kind of that consistency when you look at the secondary language for middle and high school. But we do know that within the secondary levels, that language on page 23 is useful. Upon further investigation, the variance is language that is appropriate because the secondary levels have the ability for the 6-hour variance. So it's important that we keep that variance language in the secondary, but not necessarily needed in the elementary. So our counter to the district counter just confirms that we still agree the variance language could be struck, not needed at the elementary level since we haven't ever experienced that. And it also just simplifies the language so that the intent is crystal clear that elementary educators should receive a minimum of 240 minutes of plan time in a 4-day student contact week. So we just struck out the which is equivalent to. So it would read, receive a minimum of 300 minutes of individual plan time over a 5-day student contact week, or 240 minutes of individual plan time over a 4-day student contact week.
Yeah, I mean, it lines up with the intent, but we're just trying, yeah. Yeah. Draft consensus. Ding, ding, we got a draft consensus.
I think the newest member of professional council has to make the damn sounds.
Well, I have no sound effects or sound maker.
All right. Sped paper days.
All right, so just kind of revisiting the sped paperwork days. There's a quote up on the screens here from elementary resource teacher that kind of reminds us, you know, why we're here sitting and talking about this. The quote, I've never had contract hours built in my schedule to write IEPs or evaluation reports. These are consistently completed in the evenings and on the weekends. Yesterday, I timed myself. One IEP took 5.5 hours to write, an additional 30 minutes for the prior written notice, and about 20 minutes to complete the 2 ESY forms since the student qualifies. When an evaluation report is required in addition to the IEP, the total time is closer to 10 hours for one student. With a caseload of 13 students and 3 currently in evaluation progress, that means approximately 16 weekends this school year will be spent report writing just to meet the requirements of my job. That is the equivalent of 4 full months of weekends dedicated to paperwork. While my commitment to my students remains strong, I have to consider long-term sustainability and the professional well-being. If the right opportunity were to present itself of teaching, outside of teaching, I would leave. So I think this is representative for our SPED staff that we have. We've got a lot of really hardworking special education teachers, CBR teachers, autism teachers, resource teachers, gifted educators, and some caseloads are higher than others. Some are not. There are aspects to each position within special education that we pour a lot of time in to these students, and we wouldn't have it any other way. But at the same time, we need to have a work balance as educators. And part of that is we brought forth SPED paperwork days as the solution to some of this. So one of the things that I'll go ahead and note is we'd come up with a proposal, and district obviously made a counter, and we have made a counter in the counter that the district had brought forth. So the former language was just kind of struck out, but we kept part of the language there. So in addition, we combine our mutually agreeable language with the district's counter proposal to clarify that the special education teacher and principal must agree on the dates. So the date of each professional SPED paperwork day will be determined by a mutual agreement between the building principal and the certified special education staff member. So a little bit of combining of our statements along with the districts there.
And I think that that change at the bottom was kind of spurred by some questions we got since last Wednesday, just about, will we have, while a paperwork day at any point would be helpful, a paperwork day when you don't have, quite a few IEPs coming up, for example, might not be maximum. So being able to make sure that that educator has a voice in that. And so that's why you'll notice that one's highlighted, and the one above that's highlighted is the piece that kind of goes with the question that I got quite a bit about. Obviously, our buildings need to operate. So you see some language there about unless no other operational alternative exists. We recognize that like buildings have to operate, but we got some feedback that the original language felt like we're going to do a sub plan and then it's going to get canceled. So we just wanted to give a little more assuredness that like the SPED sub days wouldn't necessarily be the first thing that goes. But we also acknowledge that you have to run a building and you need bodies to do that.
I think the only other revision was a semicolon in the language So something just, that's pretty small. It's about the very bottom of on the slide there. I think the thing that to note is, yes, this will cost money, for the school district, and we are accepting of the idea that this is something that would be new, and we're happy that the district is willing to go along with the sped paperwork days. I would note that while it may be something that costs, I think that the addition of paperwork days would appear to also have a cost savings on the back end. And the fact that, there are so many teachers, special education teachers that are leaving at the present moment, just because of the work conditions, and then also just the sheer amount of work that they're taking home. And I think that having this would be a protective factor and allow for some peace of mind for not only the educator, but also will not only just create a better outcome for students. It'll create cleaner paperwork, less corrections that have to come about, and I would note also too that we're asking for paperwork days on a quarterly basis. There's other districts that have these sped paperwork days. I think Shawnee Mission has 4 days, and I believe KCK has 8. So I think that when it comes down to it, we would be retaining more teachers when we have provisions in place like this. I think from what I understand, it was like $140,000 a year just to onboard a new teacher as a cost. And I think that it would be way easier for the district to keep the people that we have than to go out and hire more people.
I think I want to take it back to some of the staff to help to put together some of the counter and have them look at it, but
We're away from counters to counters, and now we're back to just a counter. What, you need me to switch that over for anything, or?
our counter to the behavioral proposal that we brought forward, we just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we have in place and have had in place, and things that have been implemented the last several years. Some of them ongoing, and some new things that are being implemented as well, coming up soon. one part of your proposal addressed professional learning, so wanted to take a look at that a little bit. Obviously, some professional learning. Talked to both Jenna and some other people about some of the professional learning we've offered. Just was curious how much, and to see pages and pages, 15 to 20 pages over the professional learning that's been offered the last 3 years when it comes to student behavior, whether that be student behavior workshop for principals, PBIS trainings, staff trainings provided by the behavior coaches, CW Fit. Some of you may be familiar with that. That's just an evidence-based class-wide intervention system that was to increase engagement and just reduce disruption. SCM trainings, obviously, SIP trainings, neurodiversity, student behavior related sessions provided by the PBIS coaches. Through symposium, there's always a lot of options as far as student behavior related topics there, and also summer conference, usually 10, 15, 20 plus options related to student behavior sessions offered during summer conference. Some of the systems and programs many of you be familiar with that we have in place. PBIS, obviously Swiss goes along with that from the data piece, and then TSS, and then staff support, staff members that we have in place to support student behavior, instructional coaches, PBIS coaches, behavior coaches, and obviously autism specialists. Thought we might let Rick and Tricia maybe speak to some of the practical applications of those staff members and systems and programs in their buildings.
Yeah, so anytime we have behavior management issues, it's a team and collaborative approach. So I'm kind of thinking middle level and just the experiences I've had, but behaviors that surface are not almost always they're not a surprise behavior if it's ongoing. We're a part of it from the get-go. I have weekly meetings with our team teachers. Our APs have weekly meetings along with the counselors. Our coaches are in frequent contact, especially with our SPED administrator, with our weekly SID meetings, and then our school psych. So there's a lot of things that are kind of happening, kind of behind the scenes. Specifically with what's up there, PBIS. We are, there's a tier 1 piece that I think we're probably most familiar with, but tier 2, there's a lot of layers of that. CW Fit fits in there. I know there's something called Hopset, but there's a lot of different layers with that we're dabbling in. Most of our buildings are now, in that tier 2 model, with a weekly meeting where there's the tier 2 PBIS team. You've got the PBIS committee, then you've got the tier 2 team that looks at the data from Swiss every week, and they're formulating plans, check in, check out. And those plans could take on a variety of forms. Kind of an aside from that, but it kind of dovetails in there. It's not unusual for us to use contracts with kids, and we see a behavior we're trying to either eliminate or improve, and we just work one-on-one with the kid. A lot of times that's in the office, that's between the administrator and a student, but it's often in conjunction with conversation with that teacher, and then also with the student. What do you like? What are you interested in? We're recognizing this is not, there's some things that aren't working here. So there's just kind of a lot of background work along that.
No, you've said a lot of it. So, and I think just the team approach, nothing is shocking to a principal. Yeah, we knew it, and whether it was because we arrived to it or because we're part of that discussion in PLCs, we're in every PLC, so those things come up. So nothing is really a surprise. I'm sure it's in the moments that are really big moments that are hard, and we'll kind of go through that in a little bit. But I think that's kind of, nothing is a surprise to us as far as what's happening and how we deal with it. Always going back to the kid, or whether it's their behavior plan and following it with, a plan and communicating that with the teacher as well as best as we can.
At the bottom there, I wanted to speak to just our continuum of services a little bit. Obviously, the first one, Mill Creek campus, that's specific to K through or I'm sorry, 9 through 12, with the SOAR program, Guided Study Lab, HOPE, and STRIDE programs. And then less specific, more K through 12 appropriate, obviously special education resource, SPED, emotional regulation, and autism programs, and then also our PLC programs that we have at our disposal as well. Also, the district level behavior team is something that started last year.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, so, you know, the concern with behavior is certainly, as Tricia mentioned, not a surprise to any of us. And so at a district level, we convened a team starting last year that met monthly to really focus in and track student behavior in buildings and looking at that SWIS data. So it is members of our general administration team, along with myself, and then members of our special education department, and Scott Fluke. And so we come around the table and really look at building by building what SWIS data is looking like, and then tracking even individual students that have highly escalated behaviors. And so as we were working through that process in the last year and a half, that's really where the idea was born for the Compass program. And so I mentioned that because that's something that obviously will be opening this fall and is another key piece to supporting that kind of bigger escalated behavior for students, and working to find what they need, and looking at having an alternative location for those K through 8th grade students. So that district behavior team continues to meet. We have kind of now morphed as Compass is coming to fruition. And Dr. Harrison has kind of taken the lead and developed an interdisciplinary team. And so there's some members of our district behavior team that now are continuing on that, what we call the IDT, or the interdisciplinary team, that's part of the Compass program. But that team, we meet, well, right now we're meeting sometimes more than once a week, because that's the team that is looking through all of the referrals that are now coming through for those students for the Compass program. So that team will continue to meet and review those referrals. And then we have a team approach to that, working along with that building administrator, who's kind of taking the lead in making that referral. So I share all of this along with what Clint had shared, just to continue further that obviously this is not something that we've ignored, and certainly not something that we haven't invested great resources and continue to invest resources in. We know along with this comes sometimes those even more escalated in what you all defined in terms of destructive and dangerous behaviors. And so I know Clint did some additional work and kind of gathering insight on what's been done with that.
Yeah, and I was able to get with Brent Kiger, and we talked a little bit through just some of the extra safety measures and some of those things, both for staff safety and student safety, that have been put in place over the last couple of years. Invested around $400,000 annually to Centegix, and a little bit of data from those crisis alert badge system was implemented in the 22-23 school year. The average since it was implemented is about 4,800 button pushes or alerts per year, and 96% of those alerts were related to behavior, elopement, or physical altercation. So obviously it's being used for what it was meant to be used for, and obviously great help to staff when they encounter student behavior that they need help with. In addition to that, the investments listed there, camera improvements and adding elementary cameras, obviously millions of dollars, access control, card readers, those types of things, the night lock devices on the doors, radio upgrades, moving to digital instead of analog. Those are all obviously used a lot of times in student behavior incidents. And then full-time school safety specialists at the 5 high schools, which assist with student behavior when needed. And then full-time district mental health co-responder was added in 2023, which is active in student behavior incidences when students and staff need assistance.
So in summary, we felt it was important to share the myriad of resources and trainings that have been put in place, and that we continue to invest that time and money in those endeavors, and haven't stopped doing that, as evidenced by the opening of our Compass program coming up this fall. And so recognizing those investments and that ongoing focus, and also the importance we felt needed to be placed in trusting and providing autonomy to our building principals and making decisions. We've heard obviously from Rick and Tricia that there's a team approach to all behaviors. And so to be able to write a policy that then can be applied across a myriad of settings, is not really going to be the best place for us to put that. I think there's a lot of places where we could talk about kind of administrative processes and systems. You know, we thought it was important to note that we're the only Johnson County School District that even has a section in our negotiated agreement for student behavior management. And so we didn't see a need for adjusting this policy and didn't feel like that was the appropriate place to put that. If there are concerns that administrators are not responding appropriately or staff members not receiving the support that they need, then just like in any other situation, we feel like it's important for that educator to, you know, act in their best professional judgment and to let that administrator know, hey, I have some questions. I feel like this is not getting better or I'm concerned with. And if they feel like that's not being addressed, then to be able to go to whether it's their AR or to come to the general administration assistant superintendent and have that conversation with the concerns that they have, so that we can best address those through that means.
So I guess knowing that this is, that it is a piece that exists in the current agreement, I feel like you all just did a nice job of explaining the number of different ways that you are following this language, and I think following with large part the language that we proposed. Is there specific parts of our proposal that were like issues or?
Well, I think some of the things I always get apprehensive of is when we start defining things, because when we define that this is how we're going to, the destructive behavior, then if something doesn't fall in that definition, then for the policy, we wouldn't have to follow any of that language that's written. There's also some ambiguity when we talk about a timely response to things. Well, what is a timely response? I think when we start talking about student behavior also, we have to understand that there are situations where, you know, if a student has a disability, sometimes their behaviors can fall under those dangerous or destructive definitions. But that then doesn't mean that there's not going to be other factors that we're going to have to navigate in order to support that child. And we can't write a policy that's going to be able to navigate all of those nuances. I think that's when we get into talking about administrative procedures, that's why we have building principles to be able to support and make certain that we're protecting staff and adhering to policy while at the same time providing students and children the access that they have to their public education.
Is there a way, maybe, like, so if, I guess the counter proposal is to not change any of the language. It feels like a missed opportunity to provide information of all of those resources. Because like in the list of things, and it was mentioned too, like these have been over the past several years, we've had quite a bit of turnover. And if you weren't here 5 years ago, you didn't get this. Or if you are new this year, you didn't go through the PBIS training, you didn't go through the Swiss training. So like, if there's a way of incorporating what tools educators could have access to, like, or having some sort of like, I don't know, it just seems like a missed opportunity to not address the language. If it's unchanged, it feels like it's not meeting what we just discussed. Like, maybe I'm not articulating this well, but
I think I know maybe where you're going, and Julie,
yeah,
please-
help me, please.
I think the overview you all provided and when we had some conversations about educator and student safety, we had some similar conversations about existing policies and procedures. And I don't think anybody is here to argue that we don't have robust systems and excellent people, from superintendent down to our paras. We have amazing humans that work in our system, and the needs are so varied and high, and that is not unique to Olathe, that what we're hearing from our bargaining unit is they want more policy language so they know what to expect. So I think when I heard Julia say missed opportunity, I think that's kind of what I thought of, is like this is an opportunity for us to try to come together from the high level overview you all provide, which is, as I said, robust, and then what educators are experiencing. And no matter people's intention in any system, you know, what is expected and what happens doesn't always match up perfectly. And that's not necessarily on one individual person. But the policy revisions that we suggested came from educators in the classroom, saying these are things that would help us with student behavior. And so that's what I hear of when I think of this opportunity.
I think also too is and this goes with like just the situation that we're living now at the state legislature. You know, we're about to have a good reduction in the amount of para allocations in each of our buildings. And I think this ties into behavior, because our paras and our special education teachers, when it comes to the behavior, a lot of that falls on them and the administrators. So I'm fearful of what the future holds, and the fact that we're about to experience, you know, the same amount of behaviors, or around the same amount of behaviors with less resources when it comes to staffing.
So with that, clearly, we need to have some more conversation. And I believe that everybody at this table is coming together to figure out what we can do with what we know is a national issue of educator pay and student behavior. No matter where you are, those are the two things, the top items for educator retention. So we know that is not unique. And we know in Olathe that we're always trying to figure out how we can do that. Okay. I think then that takes us down to proposals. As we get prepared for our kind of final proposals for today, I want to acknowledge that we've got some conversations in the future about a potential MOU. And what we've tried to do is try to provide many of the proposals that we outlined in our letter. But should we be talking about an MOU at our next meeting, there are a couple of things in our letter that we haven't yet addressed, but we have most of them here. And I just wanted to I think you all are understanding we were trying to get as much as possible out, but I wanted to just kind of say that there are a couple things in the letter that we haven't presented yet. And we may or may not, depending on how things go. All right, with that, we've got salary, schedule conditions, advanced degrees. That is Aaron.
So while we're getting that pulled back up, this is speaking to the piece that we noticed about compensation specifically for folks with non-standard, like they get their master's degree in a field other than education typically. And this gives us an opportunity to kind of tie in the thing that we are hearing a lot right now in our bargaining survey about counselors and other kind of related service professionals wanting to have some additional recognition and opportunities. So the language that we have kind of isolated basically hooks into the existing language on the very long policy that is our salary schedule conditions, the GBCEB. And it basically uses the framework of how we treat educational specialist degrees and proposes to create a group of professional employees who are named one of these like related service professional type masters that typically require substantially more than 36 hours. That we would, just like an educational specialist is placed in the MS 36 column, we would place that master's degree in MS 24. So that's one piece, is adding that new C that would recognize those specialty fields that require considerably more hours than a traditional educator's master's degree does. And then we also have a new E down below, just to basically try and answer the question, well, how do you make whole the people who currently exist in the district, that then the folks who have that degree currently would be able to apply for that one-time replacement, moving them over a couple columns. Obviously, this is a thing that impacts compensation, so I know it's not something we're going to get to a draft consensus on in May, but wanted to get kind of this language out there because it's a different piece than just talking about step and column and all that.
Have you modeled it? Just curious.
I did some very rough math, but it's tough because the data that we have access to doesn't say exactly who does have these degrees. So based like, correct. So I think if you look at just pulling out the people that are in the RSP like roles right now, I was ballparking at a few 100,000, but I don't put a ton of stock in my estimate.
Yeah, I was just trying to. We all know that's here.
I mean, I did the work. I got a spreadsheet I can show you. I just don't think that I've got enough something.
And there's definitely complexity there. And like Eric acknowledged, this is probably something that warrants some additional digging. And I understand, and probably the loudest voices I've heard from our counselors, and there's probably some other factors there. I think the job of the counselor has shifted quite a bit in the last few years. But the research that we've done, the majority of counseling degrees right now are 48 to 60 credit hours. And that's just so significantly more than general administration degrees or curriculum and instructional design, so this may not be it. This language, we acknowledge that it's a place to start. Yes, yes. All right.
All right, that brings us to PLCs. We wanted to look at some language for professional learning communities, and our guiding questions are on the screen. Does my voice really matter in PLCs? And if we're just getting updates, is it really a PLC? And so obviously we're considering the interest of educators. Educators are interested in seeking more autonomy. They want their voices to be heard. But we're also considering the interest of administrators because we do need to create a good distinction between what is a PLC and what is a meeting, just to share information. So we looked at two parts of the contract. The first section was policy GBZEA, which is our professional learning document. And then we also looked at our scheduling documents for elementary, middle, and high school. So,
and I have to apologize, old habits die hard. At the top of the paper where it says ONW proposal. So I can see why that would make you wonder. That was not Laura.
Right. Yes. All right, so we'll start with policy GBZEA. Basically, what we did was add some language about the process of PLCs. We added some language about agendas centering educators in the development of those agendas, And then we added some language about timing and scheduling, highlighting specifically that professional learning dates are a natural place for district-wide PLCs. And so I'd like to go through that little section with you, and it's on the screen as well. We'll keep the first sentence right there. Professional learning communities, PLCs, play an important role in the district, school, and learning improvement, as well as professional learning activities throughout the school year. And then this next section, the bulk of it addresses the process of PLC. The purpose of a PLC is through district-approved learning standards, data, and the MTSS process to address concerns or issues and identify opportunities for improvement that support student growth and achievement. The process of successfully developing and implementing PLCs requires commitment to resources such as time and training, as well as a commitment to reflective practice. PLCs are collaborative spaces, which may include but are not limited to team, grade level, subject area, department, and instructional support. PLC sessions are centered on student learning, and discussions are about shared goals and decision-making. They are interdependent and self-directed. And this next sentence that we added addresses the creation of an agenda for a PLC. Educators should collaboratively develop PLC agendas with input from administrators, coordinators, and facilitators and/or coaches. And then we'll keep some of the language that comes next. That's basically a directive that every educator will participate in PLCs. And then we added some language about scheduling. Educators are assigned to required PLCs by the principal supervisor at their home building during the professional day, and additional district-wide PLCs are optional unless they take place during professional learning time. And then we took out that final sentence because agendas were already addressed in that whole paragraph above. And then below that, basically that definition of what is a PLC, we've got two bulleted sections, and we'd like to keep those. The first bulleted section addresses timing, and it's pretty specific to level. And the second section addresses the purposes of PLC, and they're stated in a simplified and a specific manner, and we think that's really helpful. The only thing that we're suggesting we change is that sort of that definition of the team duty period. Middle schools they have PLC time during team duty period for 6th to 8th grade cross-curricular teams. We would like to strike core educators because while we do meet with core educators during that time, math, science, social studies, language arts, we also communicate information to elective teachers that as needed. So we thought cross-curricular teams was a better representation of that language. And then I'm going to go ahead and move on to scheduling documents. And I would like to point out that the information shared about PLCs for elementary, middle, and high school is the same for every level. We really think that the word collaborative is key to that explanation. We also added the word interdependent just to center educators in that process. So for every level, we took out the second to last sentence, or we altered the second to last sentence because the original language was a bit repetitive. It says PLC agenda should be collaboratively developed, agenda-driven, and focused on student learning. We thought agendas just needed to be mentioned once. Collaboratively developed by interdependent teams. PLC sessions should address concerns or issues and identify opportunities for improvement that support student growth and achievement. And then that final sentence refers us back to the policy GBZEA. And then finally, with that elementary scheduling document, there was an additional paragraph that speaks to when those PLCs will happen. And that's just because, well, the elementary schedule is a bit complicated when it comes to scheduling those meetings, getting that plan time in and scheduling those PLCs. So, and so we just separated that paragraph from the PLC explanation for elementary.
So the items in italics aren't change language.
Not
it's
change
just saying
language.
Move it down. Into
Yes.
this paragraph.
Yes. Exactly.
And middle and high are just the same, so.
Exactly. So we just felt it was important to strengthen that language. We're using PLCs all the time. And educators are involved in multiple PLCs at any given time.
What do you mean by interdependent teams?
That they work together, you know, everybody's on kind of equal footing, if you will. So you've got the educators working together. And they should be guiding, right?
And in order to work, they have to rely on each other. You can't have like one strong person who's gonna carry the team. If it's a true PLC, then not everybody is necessarily contributing in the same way. But each one has a role.
We're also centering educators as leaders.
On that first page, is the end of the first paragraph there that says educators are assigned to required PLCs by the principal supervisor at their home building during the professional day. Is that just a clarification, or have we had cases where they've been assigned to PLCs outside the professional day?
That's a great question. We just want to clarify
Okay,
that it
good.
should happen during the professional day.
Alright.
And then we have a lot of district-wide PLCs that are occurring during the professional day, but perhaps before school. And so we have a lot of educators, and maybe Angie can speak to this more appropriately, who are involved in many PLCs. And at some point we need to, they're just too many. So that's too many to have on one person's plate.
And I
So,
think we talked about this today. I
Yes.
think that during the professional day that's red, if I remember correctly, because we talked about this today.
Yes.
That was in the original,
yes,
but it was part of a different sentence. We made it
Yes.
red just to acknowledge that like we moved stuff around.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And then can you, what you just mentioned, explain a little bit more about the additional, like this.
okay, yes, no, I appreciate the opportunity. One of the things that we heard not only in our bargaining survey and just also in lots of one-on-ones about workload. You know, we're always looking at what are some things that we can take off our educators' plate. I've had some conversations with educators who are explaining, okay, I'm actually part of 4 PLCs. This PLC meets here, this PLC meets here. Then, okay, so I go to this PLC and it's on Zoom and it's sharing information, which might be a very important meeting. But the educator's perception is that it's being labeled a PLC. But yet it's a sharing information. So we acknowledge that meetings can be called during the contract day. But we're trying to be more intentional in distinguishing an educator who's being called to a meeting to share information versus something that's being called a PLC. Because I hear oftentimes educators explaining, here are the 4 different PLCs I'm part of. And these happen on different days. Talked to a middle school educator who she has 6 mornings throughout 1 month of school where she's not available to work with students because she's in different PLCs. And going through each one of them, she's also an involved educator as well. But just when we're looking at what are some things we can maybe take off educators' plates, that is one of our suggestions.
and that's why we wanted to strengthen that language to that definition. What is a PLC? We have those items listed below. These are the tasks that we're going to go through, but it's interdependent, it's collaborative, it's reflective. There are a lot of things happening in that space, and it's not just a sit and get information. So in fact, we've been told it's not necessarily just a planning time, you know.
Just speaking from the middle school, I know like we have our core teachers and they have that time during the day, and some feedback that was attempted to try to, I guess, rectify this year for our elective teachers, was a morning monthly district meeting, and we have singletons, so there's no PLC partner for them in the building. And so that was kind of based on some feedback to try to, establish a time that was consistent where these groups of educators who don't have a partner in the building to be able to PLC or discuss topics that they need, and there's administrators that join those. And so I know some of those conversations I've been a part of too, of if you're a teacher that has potentially multiple preps in just different disciplinaries, that you might find yourself wanting to go. And I think a lot of our buildings have said, kind of pick your primary one or whatever, but I can see some of that. I just wanted to share that some of it was an attempt to try to kind of level the playing field between our elective
For sure.
side and our core. That
It's a difficult balance, for sure.
Is that an example?
So that would be clarifying, because we do think that our elective teachers deserve access to PLCs. But we're trying to clarify that, those district-wide PLCs that occur, outside of, professional learning, having those, unless those are the primary PLC that the home building principal is assigning them to, beyond that, to clarify that those are optional. But we appreciate the,
Rick's example.
Yeah.
of Singleton teacher.
Yes.
Those PLCs, that would be an option.
I would say that if educators are assigned to required PLCs by the principal administrator at their home building. So if that is the PLC that the administrator says, this is your PLC, great.
so maybe some of that was.
Yeah.
Right, that's a great example.
Yes. Now, as we face additional efficiencies, it is likely we'll have teachers that have more and more variety in their schedule.
Kind of parallels to some degree how PLCs function at the high school level with those of us. If you have 3 preps, your primary PLC that you're working with weekly is one of those, but it's maybe not all 3 of them. Right. So.
Okay, all right. Our last policy proposal for today is with assignment and transfer. And I think in some ways, probably all of us employees will leave the schools in one way or another is wondering as we face, hate to use the phrase unprecedented times, because during COVID, we said we were going to stop saying that. But what's going to happen to me, that anxiety, I think that is a shared worry. And as we've had some conversations with bargaining unit members, particularly in buildings that are being consolidated or that have been being transformed into something new, or even educators who have been impacted by RIF, these questions are front of mind. So our suggestions for the assignment and transfer policy revisions are an attempt to take what we've heard from educators about what would make them feel better about this question. But we know that we don't know everything, but we can try to make our processes more clear and more fair according to what educators have said they would like to see. So with that, we have the assignment transfer language. I think all of the copies there have 2 pages double-sided, and the revisions are in green. And I think this involves the entire policy with a little bit at the end of the RIF policy that just got cut off, but there were no changes in the little paragraph that was remaining. I just lost a page when I was stapling. So I wanted to clarify that. So the first item that we wanted to talk about is the term district seniority. It's used quite a bit. And I hear a lot of questions about what exactly does district seniority mean, because we know that district seniority plays a role in particularly our language when it comes to transfers under the reduction of staff for other reasons. So we suggest that we add a C, and of course that would then adjust the other letters, but the letters are not showing marked out the way they should show. District seniority would be defined as the number of years of continuous service in the district. Approved leaves do not interrupt continuous service. A year of service with a leave of absence of 1 semester or less will be counted as 1 year toward district seniority. This is something that has popped up in several conversations with educators. We have a variety of reasons for leave, and oftentimes they involve circumstances that none of us would choose to be in. So we wanted to clarify that, that district seniority is important and what role we would play in district seniority. Of course, we always hear a lot about reassignment, but we don't have any suggested changes about reassignment, but we get a lot of questions about reassignment. But I think the policy is clear, even if not everybody loves it. The next policy change we want to suggest is under transfer. Underneath employee initiated transfer, so this is when somebody is choosing to change the building, for example. We understand based on conversations with HR that our current system, I won't say the O word, no longer allows people to apply through that system without the automatic notification of their home principal. That's my understanding. So my fear in not having that clear in language is that an employee who wants to apply for a transfer but not let their home building principal know until June 1st, which our original language says is a possibility, they might complete the document or complete the application process and then later realize, oh crap, I did not realize that was going to happen. So what we're suggesting is the language that you see in C. If the transfer is in effect June 1st, Human Resources may inform the employee principal administrator of the application. We acknowledge at some point the home principal administrator needs to be contacted. The additional language that replaced the struck sentence is an employee who wishes their application for transfer not to be disclosed to their current principal until June 1st should notify HR of their transfer request rather than submitting it through the online application system. That is my understanding of what currently needs to happen. It's just not clear in our language. That's what would need to happen. So it's aligning policy to practice. Okay. The next suggested changes are to do with the less desirable types of transfer, which would be the initiated transfer due to reduction in staff or even administrator transfer due to other reasons, and the administrator initiated transfer due to reduction in staff. We know that currently when there is a reduction at a building, there's a whole process that involves asking for volunteers, involves district seniority. So we think those steps 1 through 5 are very clear. We hear a lot about step 6. And what we are hoping to achieve with this revised step 6 is to help educators understand that there are other elements besides seniority that might play a role. We want to make sure that they understand that their district seniority does still matter. So an employee with the least seniority in the effective area will be considered first for transfer. An exception, so this is the suggested changed language, an exception may be made only if the principal administrator provides HR with a clear, specific, and job-related written rationale for retaining the employee. Any such rationale must be based on demonstrable factors, related to the position, including licensure, endorsement, position-specific qualifications or training, documented performance evaluations, state of Kansas highly qualified requirements. You'll notice this list is really the same list as in the struck language, or relevant extracurricular academic support assignments. This rationale shall not be arbitrary or based on subjective preference and must be applied consistently across similarly situated employees. Upon request, HR will provide the written rationale to the affected employee. So we see here a similar list of factors that can be considered, because we know that just plain seniority doesn't always make the best building. And we want to acknowledge that in facing the years where we're going to see a lot of an administrator initiated transfer, having stronger language, I think would help our educators feel more confident in facing that. C, beside itinerant pool, is struck by accident. It wouldn't let me unstrike it because we love that. And then lastly, our understanding is that when an administrator initiated transfer due to reduction in staff, that language is only applicable to when there are reductions within a building. So let's say at a high school, you have 15 ELA teachers, and because of student population, you need 14. If there is a combining of buildings or an entire building is closing, our understanding is that HR reads that an administrator initiated transfer due to reduction in staff is not the policy that is followed. In those cases, the policy is administrator initiated transfer for other reasons. So what we would like to suggest, because you see the language, the original language for other reasons is very broad. Okay, we would like to suggest taking some of the certainty from the administrator initiated and embedding that into the other reasons. Again, to provide our employees a little certainty. Well, a more expectation of the process. I think the word certainty right now is tough for everybody to swallow. So the language that we're suggesting is when schools are closing or combining, the process of administrator initiated transfer for other reasons will occur in the following order, excuse me. Number 1, or A, employees within the affected areas and schools will be listed in order according to district seniority. My understanding is with Westview, that was part of the process that occurred. And then B, the employees the least seniority in affected areas and schools will be considered first for transfer. And then you will notice after that language is the same language that we had above in step 6B. So I won't read that language again. It's a simple copy paste. Okay. And then the last element of the policy before I see what questions you have would be the reduction in force. I know that nobody wants RIFs. We are hoping we can align our facilities with our student population without that. We also know that already has not been possible. So based on conversations with educators in those schools, and quite frankly, educators that have been affected by RIFs even this year, procedures for callback, we think it's very clear what happens with the RIF process, what role district seniority plays in that and all of that. The piece that we got feedback on procedures for callback would be really the third factor. So we're under B, procedures for callback. Staff members on furlough will be considered as part of the callback list based on the following. So a staff member who would not have a job in Olathe schools, but they're licensed and qualified in a different area, could be called back. Currently, the language is teaching experience in the available positions within the last 5 years. And I do understand that the intent of that language is likely that we want to make sure that we have people doing the jobs that they are qualified to do. And I would assert that A and B fulfill that. Instead, what we would like to suggest is district seniority play a role in that. One of the pieces of feedback that I've received is that it feels, nobody feels good being in a RIF, callback or not. There's no way that language can make it good. We acknowledge that, but it feels really, really bad when some people are being called back who have been in the district, maybe starting a program, not starting a program longer than others, and district seniority is not part of the callback process. So that's why we're asking the district seniority to be one of 3, making sure that obviously if a person is qualified and they are licensed in that area, then we know that they are matched up with the job that they can do.
Question is on the language that's being proposed for when there's combining or closing of a school. And it says when schools are closing or combining, the process of administrative initiative transfer will occur in the following order. Employees within the affected areas and schools will be listed in order according to district seniority. So if we're closing Jones Elementary and Jones Elementary, we're now going to be rebounding. So who are the affected schools? All of those buildings that are taking the Jones Elementary kids?
So it would appear to me that in that case, I mean, this is, I think, one of the reasons we have the committee and the task force and the ongoing work that we're doing. So I think this language is really tough. and I don't have all the answers. But one thing I do know is that what I consistently hear from educators is the kind of administrator initiated transfer that we are most likely to see in the next few years is this, and the language we currently have is a paragraph, which is very open. And I know from conversations with HR that there's a commitment to considering in seniority in what happened with Westview, for example. And I've appreciated those conversations, but not having that outlined in policy is raising anxiety. So I think we would have to work through, quite frankly, some of those practical things. I don't have all the answers today.
Because we're going to need flexibility
Mhm.
in making all of these decisions moving forward, and that's what is concerning to me when we start writing these things in policy that I then can't even begin to put into practice practically when it could be happening in multiple buildings across multiple levels with individuals who have varying experiences. So that's just one of my first thoughts I have on that. And then on the backside, the procedures for callback, my concern would be the individual who's taught, physics, but there's somebody else who has a science endorsement and hasn't taught physics in 15 years, would then be coming into a position being called back above that person who has taught that exact same course.
We think that when it comes down to callback, that teaching experience, let me rephrase that. We don't think there's any ideal way to do callback. What we have heard from educators is seniority not being part of the callback procedure at all doesn't feel good.
But if you're on the furlough list, you have the least seniority. So these are probably going to be people that are clustered in very similar years of experience,
In a large RIF category, yes.
Yeah.
In a small RIF category, maybe not. Yeah, but yeah. Yes, I think we're all full, our brains are full, so we appreciate you all today. I know we have a lot to consider. We'll be in touch, Clint, about agenda setting for May 6th. Okay. Thank you.